Greetings, listeners. Welcome to Consulting Between Friends. I'm your host, Michael Holmes Jr. The last episode, I talked about natural disasters, and the disaster I focused on was a hurricane. Well, this episode will focus on my experience from Hurricane Ida and others as well. Hurricane Ida was a Category 4 hurricane. This hurricane had a lot of people worried because it was exactly the date of Hurricane Katrina. 16 years ago, on August 29th, was Hurricane Katrina. When people of New Orleans heard how similar this hurricane was to Katrina, a lot of people decided to evacuate. How peculiar! Hurricane Ida came ashore on the same date of Hurricane Katrina, which brought tremendous damage to New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. This episode topic is Hurricane Ida, the substantial destruction that changed people's lives living in the Gulf Coast as well other areas. This topic will be a 2 or 3 part episode focusing on the hurricane. We will return after a message from our sponsor. Everyone is always planning things, and advertising is needed to make it happen. So, if it's personal or business, let Pinpoint Designs and Images solve that problem. With Pinpoint Designs and Images LLC, you will receive quality work and professional service at a great price. The service that is offered: flyers, business cards, programs, invitations, photo books, ad booklets, and much more. Michael Holmes Jr., owner/principal designer of Pinpoint Designs and Images LLC. Contact me by email or social media. Email address is pinpointdesignsandImages@gmail.com, and Instagram, Pinpoint Designs, and Facebook, Pinpoint Designs and Images. We are back. On Sunday, August 29th, 2001, Hurricane Ida was approaching onto Louisiana coast. The hurricane made landfall in Port Lafourchon with maximum winds of 150 miles per hour. It was very close to a Category 5 hurricane, which was Hurricane Katrina. The hurricane was over New Orleans, Louisiana, early Sunday morning. At that time, it was a lot of rain in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, and the surrounding parishes. During that day, it was very windy and rainy. See, the location where I live, we was on what they consider the wet side of the storm, which is mostly bad for New Orleans, Louisiana, because New Orleans is known to flood, which it did flood in some areas. At the beginning of it, it looked like the hurricane was not approaching us. But all of a sudden, you started realizing the rain is coming down much more and the wind is becoming very powerful. In other words, you cannot stand out and watch what's going on. You started hearing tornado warnings in some areas, flash flood warnings in areas, warnings on how powerful the wind is supposed to be in your area, that the hurricane is approaching my area in Marrero, Louisiana, in Jefferson Parish. And at that time, they were basically saying that it will approach you around 12 p.m. When it started approaching further onto the city of New Orleans, you started realizing that it's really here and the power is about to go out very soon. It started flickering in my house, back and forth, back and forth. And then all of a sudden the power went out around 2 p.m. The storm lasted from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. That is a long time for the storm. It ended up being a slow-moving storm once it hit land, which is really a bad thing because you want it to go fast for it doesn't become a rain event on top of the whole city, which can create lots of flooding. But it started picking up eventually. But in some areas, it did flood. But in the area which I stay in, it did not flood. Before the hurricane was approaching New Orleans, Louisiana, they were telling everybody to evacuate the low-lying areas, which is Plaquemine Parish. Those people are right by the Gulf Coast, which is known to flood. Also, those people are not protected by the levee system, which was created a long time ago and improved after Hurricane Katrina. So if you live outside the levee protection, you have to always evacuate. You're not going to be protected from the hurricane. I live inside of the hurricane protection zone. So I knew I would be safe, but I also had to worry at the same time. During that day, it was very windy and raining. That the hurricane is approaching my area in Marrero, Louisiana. Next, I will go in detail about how the hurricane was causing damage to my parents' house and surrounding areas. The protection we had around the house for the hurricane at the time is what you call storm shutters. Storm shutters was on all the windows and the doors around the house. This was a way to protect us inside the house while the hurricane was passing. When the power went out, when the hurricane was passing, I remember hearing outside that the wind was whipping really hard. In other words, a whistling sound. And all of a sudden, whip, whip on top of the roof. So I knew the roof was starting to get damaged at that time. The damage continued to happen on top of the roof. We all started noticing in the house the roof was getting damaged very bad. All of a sudden, we decided to go to the attic and check and see how the roof was doing. When we went to the attic, we realized a hole was inside the roof. So we knew we had to get into survivor mode to fix this problem. The turbine flew off the roof. That is why they had a hole in the roof. So we decided to patch up for we can all be safe inside the house. The next major problem we started realizing because of the hurricane passing over us was the French doors in the house going towards the backyard. All of a sudden, water started being on the floor. See, we have ceramic tile in the house, so I knew it was easy to clean up. But it was coming so rapidly, we had to start cleaning up for it to get any worse. When we started cleaning up the water, we realized it was coming constantly, like every 15 or 20 minutes. So we had to get towels and keep sopping up the water. During this process, sopping up the water on the floor, it was my cousin and my dad and I who was in charge of keeping the floor dry to protect everybody in the house. After cleaning up the floor constantly because of the water was coming inside the house, we started to relax and try to stay calm while the hurricane was passing over us. While we was keeping calm inside the house, we was just relaxing. And my dad looked up at the ceiling and he started realizing that the sheetrock of the ceiling was starting to split. So we really started panicking at that time. That is something to panic about because the storm is really causing a problem to the house that we decided to stay in for the hurricane. So it started splitting and you saw a straight line going across. And then all of a sudden, we decided to pack our things and go to the garage to be safe. At that time, when we were doing that, it started splitting even more. And then all of a sudden, bow, onto the floor. The sheetrock from the ceiling just came down all of a sudden. No one got hurt, but that was something to really worry about going forward. Because the next thing started basically happening was it started raining inside the house. And the storm was still passing, and it was still in the middle of the storm. This was around about like 8 p.m. And like I mentioned earlier, the storm was continue going on to 1 a.m. So at this time, we basically had to stay put. We was planning to go to one of our cousin houses who stayed in the subdivision we live in. But we knew the safe approach was to stay inside the house while the storm was passing. We decided to do something else the next day after the storm passed. The next major problem we started having inside the house was the ceiling started coming down in the kitchen as well and the living room. So all of a sudden, it started becoming a big mess inside the house. The hurricane was really starting to destroy inside my parents' house. But through it all, we were all safe and no one was hurt. Like I mentioned earlier, we stayed inside the house while the storm was passing, even though the house was getting destroyed. So we all went to sleep, and the next day, Monday, August 30th, we got up and we went outside to see the damage of the house. The damage of the house was shingles all over the ground in the backyard and the front yard. The wooden fence around the house was down the ground because of the hurricane. The screen and patio, we realized one of the screens was torn because of the hurricane, which had debris flying around up in there. You looked at the roof, you saw how damaged the roof was. So at this time, like everyone in the neighborhood when they start reviewing their house, this is called cleanup day. In other words, clean up the mess which the hurricane has created around your house. We started picking up the debris on the ground that we saw to make the house look more decent compared to it was for the storm. I decided that morning after picking up the debris in the yard to go get in my car and go drive around the subdivision to see the damage that has caused by the hurricane. When I was driving around, I realized everyone in the subdivision has roof damage from the hurricane. You saw some holes in some people's roofs. You saw some people's roofs has caved in. In other words, you did not even see the wood foundation of the roof. It was an opening inside the house. You saw down power lines and cables that were lying on people's houses or in the street. You saw trees and bushes all over the place. So basically you had to pay attention while you was driving around or walking in the subdivision at this time. When I mentioned about trees, they were uprooted from the ground. In other words, a big old opening. The tree was literally out the ground because of the hurricane. But through it all, in my subdivision, there was a whole lot of damage. And this just was the first day of seeing what was going on around the neighborhood. At this time, I did not go outside my neighborhood to go see the other damage around my area. I basically stayed put and tend to the house which I live in that need to be done. My dad, my cousin, and we decided to start cleaning up around the house. And my dad started making the house more livable than it was. So we started pulling down the installation that was damaged from the roof from the hurricane. In other words, it was wet and damp, which caused a lot of mess by doing that. So when it started falling and everything, we started sweeping it up and putting it into bags. It was a whole lot we were picking up. We were basically cleaning out the living room where it collapsed first at, and then also the kitchen. This is basically what I mean cleanup day, making your house more livable for you to stay in if you have to due to the hurricane. The other way we protected the house from the hurricane for future damage is my dad and my uncles came to the house to help patch up the roof that was damaged. And I was helping along with them giving them supplies that they needed while they was on the roof. So as I described, that you can see, it was a lot of work that had to be done around the house after the hurricane passed to get the house back livable for us to stay in. Now it's nighttime. It's pitch dark inside the house. We have flashlights and candles for us to be in the house. The first night after the hurricane in the house, that night, it was really hot. So you're trying to stay cool. So one way we were staying cool was drinking lots of water that we had for the hurricane. And since I'm a guy, that most guys might go ahead and do to stay cool is you basically take your shirt off and just go to sleep. So basically, that's what I was doing to stay cool. And the other way I was staying cool was wearing some shorts or some clothing that can keep me cool during the day and night. One thing I'm going to talk about next is how we were surviving by eating. See, we were barbecuing and we had something called a propane stove. So basically, we was able to cook wherever we wanted to cook. In the morning, we was using the propane stove. So we were fixing breakfast and we were eating like grits, eggs, sausage. Like I said, with the propane stove, you basically can fix wherever you want on a regular basis, just like you had power in your house before the power went out, if you had your house being electric. And we also was barbecuing. So we started barbecuing like some barbecue chicken. As you can see, during the hurricane, we was less fortunate to be able to cook after the hurricane and have some food. Some people are less fortunate to have items like this. The city of New Orleans and Jefferson Parish was offering free meals to families who need a hot meal since they're unable to cook any food or do not have any money to buy items needed. Also, local groups in the city of New Orleans and Jefferson Parish decided to pitch in the community to offer free food and items needed to survive after the hurricane. You started hearing this on the local radio, and people was calling in, giving information. That is what you heard on the local radio and news for the entire week after the hurricane. Important information to survive after the hurricane. Here are some of the items people was looking for after the hurricane that is very important to survive. Water, ice, food to eat. And one more major thing that was important to everyone surviving after the hurricane is gas for your car and gas for your generator. I'm going to go in more detail about this in a minute. The reason why gas was so important to everyone after the hurricane, it was your fuel for your car and your fuel for your generator. That's right, fuel for your generator. There was a shortage on gas in the city of New Orleans and surrounding parishes after the hurricane. So basically, when someone saw a gas station open, everybody piled around it and say, oh, look, this gas station have gas. And before you knew it, it was a long line getting gas. When I mean a long line, you could be sitting in line for at least 2 or 3 or 4 hours. That is a long time standing in line for gas. And you also was standing in line. They actually had 2 lines. One for people who walk up to fill their container for the generator, and the other for people filling up their vehicle for gas. So in other words, gasoline was a hot commodity after the hurricane. Very hot. I have some proof for that about gas. One, I was sitting in line for gas like 4 hours for gas one morning. Another time, my uncle went and got in line for gas at Chevron gas station on the West Bank in New Orleans early in the morning. I'll say like about 2 o'clock in the morning. That's right, 2 o'clock in the morning, waiting in line getting gas. There was a lot of people in front of him. When it got to his time to the gas station, I found out from him it was 10 o'clock in the morning. 10 o'clock in the morning, he was able to get his gas. But when he got his gas, even though it took a long time getting it, he had gas for his vehicle and gas for his generator. Well, this will be the last thing. I'm about to give you an update about the hurricane. For y'all sports fans out there, I know you might have heard, or if you did not hear, that the New Orleans Saints football team in New Orleans was affected because of the hurricane. They was unable to play in the Superdome for their next game after the hurricane. So they have to travel on the road and play somewhere else for a whole month. But they will be back in New Orleans in October for their game. That's the big news in sports in New Orleans after the hurricane. And that's it for this episode. The next few episodes, we will be focusing on the recovery after Hurricane Ida and the different problems that the city of New Orleans were facing and the surrounding parishes. So stay tuned for more about Hurricane Ida destruction in South Louisiana and surrounding areas. One last thing, remember to support Black business owners and keep the people in your prayers who was affected by Hurricane Ida. Thank you for listening to Consulting Between Friends. This podcast is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts, as well other platforms that are available. So like and subscribe. Need to contact us and leave us a comment? You can find us on Instagram at Consulting B Friends. Once again, Consulting B Friends. An email address is consultingbfriends@gmail.com. Once again, consultingbfriends@gmail.com. Consulting Between Friends. Thanks to everyone for making this possible. Your hosts, Michael Holmes Jr. and co-host Shay R. Jones. The producer and content creator, Michael Holmes Jr. Artwork cover, Michael Holmes Jr. Original music, a DJ name / content distributor, Power 77 Radio.